I would just love to maul his face off.
Dust and Elysian Tail was first released all the way back in 2012 and was developed almost entirely by one dude, Dean Dodrill, who is in fact a dude and not a Pokemon. Trust me, I looked him up. One look at Dust and it's obvious Dodrill has some serious animation chops. And the fact he took clear inspiration from Don Bluth tells you Dodrill has an eye for quality. I mean, an American Tail, an Elysian Tail. I know a sweet homage when I see it. Bluth's animations are iconic to us children of the 80s. The guy's responsible for scarring an entire generation by introducing us to the concept of death on the big screen at a very young age.
Dear sweet little foot, do you remember the way to the Great Valley?
I guess so. But why do I have to know you're gonna be with me?
I'll be with you. Even if you can't see me.
And things never got better for us. Disney would reopen those wounds with the on-screen death of Mufasa, and then we got to watch 9/11. It was great to see someone emulate Bluth's legendary animation style, and in an indie game no less. It still blows my mind how a single developer can make something as beautiful and high quality as Dust. Typically, when you see a single dev project, you're looking at something with 8 to 16-bit graphics or early PlayStation 1 era graphics tops. But Dust? You look at this and go, really? One dude made all this? Really? And it's not just its presentation. Dust and Elysian Tail is actually a competently working video game too. Dodrill illustrated, animated, designed, and programmed everything. He did have help with aspects of the game, such as voice acting and the narrative, and Hyperduck Soundworks composed the game's music. But everything else? That was all Dodrill. It's pretty dang impressive. So, what's Dust even about? It takes place in a world called Falana and starts with the titular Dust sleeping in a forest. And like most video game protagonists, he has amnesia and no clue where he is or what's going on. It doesn't take long for things to get weird as a floating, talking sword awakens Dust, introduces himself as the Blade of Aura, proclaims Dust as the fated sword bearer, and instructs the confused Dust to bear him. Suddenly, a tiny and exhausted winged creature named Fidget bursts from the surrounding trees, claiming to be the sword's guardian. This sudden sword bearing evokes the ire of the minuscule guardian, who then challenges Dust to mortal combat. Dust and the sword immediately brush her off and tell her to join their gang. With little resistance and much confusion, she joins their gang and they all head east to begin their adventure of self-discovery, balance, and genocide stopping. All set to a pretty sweet soundtrack. Speaking of the sweet soundtrack, check this out. This is the pride of my Metroidvania collection, and possibly the most expensive piece in it. As you've probably gathered, I love me some Dust and Elysian Tail. But just because I love it, does that mean it's a great Metroidvania you should place at the top of your backlog? I'd definitely not make that assumption based on something that I like. There's plenty of trash out there I love playing that others absolutely hate. Not that Dust could ever be considered trash by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying, I love me some trashy games.
Now we get to the part where I kick his
She's deadly.
So before you start shuffling around your MV priority list, it's best to break Dust down to see what it's all about. And when we break Metroidvanias down, you know we start with
Combat.
Dust's combat is probably its most divisive aspect. You either love it or you hate it. Why? Because there's really not a lot to it, and it gets real old real quick. That is, if you don't enjoy the combat. Me? I love Dust's combat, but I also love Muso games like Dynasty Warriors and Hyrule Warriors and whatnot, and Dust's combat is very reminiscent to games of that ilk. What's that mean? It means there are hordes of mindless enemies for you to slaughter with very little resistance. It's not uncommon for a swarm to surround you and wait for you to attack. Sure, there'll be the odd enemy here and there who'll swipe at you, but most just stand around politely waiting for their turn. And then once you start attacking, it becomes pretty obvious they never had a chance of doing any real harm to you in the first place, seeing as you juggle all their stupid asses until they either die from your sword slashes or from starvation from being juggled in the air for so long. I enjoy the combat because it feeds into my primordial urge to be awesome. The power trip you get as you drill through a legion of enemies and come out unscathed is pretty sweet. And the absolute chaos you leave in your wake is super satisfying and often hilarious. As you zoom and slash flash across the screen, you'll fling enemies all over the place, either by smacking them with your sword or through the sheer power of aerodynamics. Watching enemies helplessly lift into the air and follow your vortex of destruction never gets old. And the chaos doesn't stop there. Fidget has some pretty terrible and ineffective magic spells she can cast.
Please contain yourselves as I demonstrate.
That was, very pretty.
But if her spell hits Dust's twirling sword or hits him while he's twirling in the air, the spell turns into a screen-clearing, multi-hitting homing attack. This game's combat is just a cluster and it's so fun.
Yeah, when Dust starts swinging that sword, you don't want to be anywhere near him. Have you seen the screen? He just goes...
But like I said, not everyone digs the combat, and I get it. What I described to you is literally the entire game. I know so many people who've bounced off Dust because they hated its shallow combat that never really evolves. You have a list of ground and air combos, your sword twirling move that can hit enemies directly or spread Fidget's magic, your air drill attack, a helm splitter attack, and a pretty sweet looking aerial grab where Dust slams some poor jabroni into the dirt. That's easily the most satisfying move to pull off. Dust has a couple defensive maneuvers as well, a dodge and a parry. The dodge is cool in that you can also do it in the air, but it's also a little obnoxious because each direction has a dedicated trigger button. So if I want to dodge left, I have to hit the left trigger. The parry utilizes one of my favorite parry systems, stolen straight from Street Fighter III Third Strike. Dust will parry any attack his sword collides with, creating a satisfying clashing sound and providing an opportunity to follow up with some devastating damage. I love this parry system because it requires zero skill. Maybe a little skill against giant enemies, but against everything else, you'll be pulling parries off by accident as you swing your sword like a maniac. A parry system that doesn't require me to stop my never-ending onslaught of attacks is a good parry system in my book. Gotta keep that power trip going and that dopamine flowing. To help make things fair for all the game's helpless cannon fodder, Dust is beholden to an energy bar that depletes as he twirls his sword, drills through the air, dodges, and uses Fidget's magic. Once the bar is exhausted, Dust will have to wait for the bar to recharge. There's also this thing where Dust will gradually turn red as he uses his twirling moves. If he twirls for too long and turns too red, Dust will fall over, bringing his assault to a halt, and we don't want that. The game isn't only populated by endless drones of dispensable goons. Dust also has 4 whole bosses in its 10-hour runtime. Yeah, that's pretty abysmal. What makes it worse is that they all suck. All 4 of them. Not a single one poses a challenge. They're so bad, I really don't want to spend any more time on them. At least not till we get to the narrative and spoilers. And that's pretty much it for combat. There are items you can use to heal yourself and status effects that mix things up, but by and large, Dust's combat is relatively mindless. But it's fun to zone out to as you take in the game's beautiful environments and tableaus, which you're absolutely ruining with your chaotic battles. There are some things that keep combat engaging, such as dodging incoming attacks, monitoring Dust's energy bar and redness, capitalizing on parries you might accidentally pull off, and keeping that combo meter going. Not only is it fun to watch the combo numbers tick up, but you get rewarded with EXP modifiers as those numbers climb. But more on that in the progression section.
Abilities, platforming.
Dust has a plethora of combat abilities out the gate that I've already mentioned, such as dodging and twirling. The twirls actually have a name, by the way. The Dust Storm. I don't know, it's kinda cringe, but I like it. And like most Metroidvania protagonists, Dust also gets a handful of traversal abilities. And they're exactly the ones you'd think he gets, like sliding and double jumping. He also gets the ability to climb vines and a more interesting ability to super jump out of geysers. But unfortunately, there's nothing here of note, and abilities are trickled out way too slowly. Plus, Dust's best moves are ones he starts with, his mid-air dodge and aerial dust storm. They both give you some pretty impressive distance, are super helpful in combat, and just look cool, especially the aerial dust storm. You can't control its vertical, but it has homing properties, and if there are any enemies above you, man, will Dust just go crazy. You can cover a lot of ground and do some pretty significant skips if you use this just right. It's legit nuts. Platforming in Dust is average at best. I can't call many particularly challenging sections, outside of the challenge rooms scattered throughout the map. And if a platforming section was interesting, I guarantee it involved the explosive floating fruit that seems to grow everywhere in Falana. This dangerous produce could be sucked in by your twirling and used to blow up walls. But you had to be fast because they'd blow up automatically after so long. And you had to be careful maneuvering them through hazards and enemies as you raced toward your destination, which was most likely a destructible wall full of roasted wall chicken. Don't ask. It's an ancient Belmont recipe. In retrospect, the fruit made for some fun sequences. There was even a time you had to use the fruit as a light source in a dark cavern. Spooky. But other than these fruit sections and some cool and creative optional sequences to rescue your friends, it's tough to recall much else as the platforming really wasn't that memorable. Dust's traversal abilities are trickled out so infrequently that its overall level design suffers for it. And Dust as a character doesn't move very dynamically or in any interesting ways outside of his barely controllable aerial dust storm. So he ends up feeling kinda generic and a little chunky. Don't get me wrong, he controls well enough, just not so well that I'd be willing to do precision platforming with him. I feel the dev was mindful of this by the looks of some of the moving platforms he put in the game. These floating dinner trays are big enough for several elephants to platform on. In the end, I didn't mind the platforming being mediocre because Dust's real focus is on its combat. I think I'd have liked it if the camera was pulled back a little so I could see things better, but other than that, not a whole lot to complain about here.
Progression.
There's a lot to talk about here. I guess we'll start with the game's oddest design choice, and that's how it handles leveling up your stats. But first, how does Dust level up? Why? By killing things and completing side quests, of course. When Dust attacks things, his combo meter increases. The higher the combo, the greater the EXP multiplier is for killing all the things. You have a very limited time between hits to keep the combo going, so you gotta be quick if you want to level up faster with the multipliers. This is probably my favorite mechanic in the game. It adds a much needed layer to the button mashy combat.
Mash the buttons!
And it's genuinely fun to see how high you could get your combo while also getting rewarded. The side quests in this game are pretty diverse, tasking players with rescue missions, finding items, collecting materials.
Wait, did you just... Did you just put that thing in your inventory?
Yeah? What?
Okay then.
Hitting a high combo, and even doing weird things involving a paranoid dude with a strange box. I gotta say, I was never not entertained by these quests. And it was never not funny when you leveled up while talking to an NPC after completing a quest. Dust just explodes in a cascade of light right in front of them. You'd think that'd freak people out. Anyway, every time Dust levels up, you get a skill gem you can allocate among 4 stats. Max health, attack, defense, and fidget. The first 3 stats increase exactly what you think they increase, and increasing your fidget stat makes your flying Nimbat companion fidget's magic stronger. My favorite part about this upgrade system is that each increase is astronomical, sometimes doubling the stat's value at least. It always felt great and impactful when you increased any stat. My least favorite part about this system is how you're forced to keep your character balanced. Basically, you can never increase any one stat 4 gems higher than your lowest stat. It's really not that big a deal, but I would have loved to have maxed out my strength stat early. With the way stat increases work, you'd be one-shotting everything by level 15. And that's exactly why such a strict limitation was placed on leveling. I suppose it could be argued that leveling this way also reinforces the game's theme on balance, but we'll get into that in the narrative and spoilers section. Hey! There's gear in this game. Dust can equip all kinds of different armors, but he only gets the one weapon, the Blade of Aura. But he can attach augments onto the blade to increase his and Fidget's damage. Dust also has 3 accessory slots, 1 for amulets and 2 for rings. And let me tell you, these accessories start out weak, but as you progress, their stat boosts increase exponentially. Some of the late game accessories increase your stats to exorbitant heights. It's actually insane to look at some of these end game numbers. Accessories can also increase EXP acquisition, the amount of gold dropped by enemies, and item drop rates. Items dropped by enemies are usually crafting related, meaning they either drop crafting blueprints or crafting materials. You can take these blueprints to a shop, and with the right materials, you can get yourself a brand new augment or accessory or piece of armor. I always find random enemy drops to be addicting in Metroidvanias, and you'll find that's the case in Dust 2. There's nothing quite like scoring something rare while you're out and about slaughtering everything in your path. Here's a pro tip I didn't discover until the very end of my second playthrough of Dust. If you find a crafting material and sell it to the traveling merchant, that crafting material will then be available to buy in large quantities moving forward. I had no idea, and I guaranteed I was told about this somewhere in the game. It was probably real subtle though, definitely not followed up by a funny joke.
Ah, he'll buy them at a high price.
Well, yes. Yes, I will.
That'll do it for progression. Dust can level up via murder and NPC side quests, he can increase stats with stat points, and there's lots of gear, some of which substantially affects Dust's stats. So staying up to date on gear is a really good idea. And the best way to stay up to date is to make sure you're crafting stuff.
Exploration.
Exploration in Dust doesn't do a lot to excite players. Most of what you'll be doing is mindless combat, which I've already established I'm cool with. I just know not everyone will be. The biomes are pretty diverse with predictable gimmicks, like the hot biome has harmful lava, and the snow biome has avalanches, and the underground biome is dark and requires a light source sometimes. This isn't a dig at the biomes, I'm just calling them like I sees them. The biomes are deceptively larger than you'd think based on their maps from the overworld screen. Well, the ones that are actual explorable biomes and not just tiny areas holding a one-off puzzle or a dope rave for all your indie friends. Technically, Dust's world isn't interconnected, made obvious by the overworld I just mentioned. From this overworld screen, you can watch Fidget sleeping like a creepy degenerate, or select the biome you want to travel to. Pick a biome, then choose your starting point, either at the beginning or end of the biome, and nowhere in between. This is the most annoying part of Dust, the lack of fast travel. You can teleport out of a biome via a save point, but you can't return to that save point, nor can you ever teleport to any other save points. You always have to start the biome all over again. And like I said, these biomes are deceptively big. And having to travel through them in their entirety every time you want to backtrack gets tiresome, especially because the game will block exits if an enemy is around. I hate this mechanic so much. Just let me leave. If I wanted to stick around and fight, I'd have fought them already. You're just wasting my time. Despite these ridiculous design choices used for obvious padding, backtracking isn't so bad. Dust removes a lot of the mental taxation by marking up the maps for you. You'll know where challenge rooms are, where chests or other interesting collectibles are, where shops and save points are, and the game keeps track of map and treasure completion for each area. All you have to do is remember what skill you were lacking that stopped you from exploring an area or obtaining that chest in the first place. As far as collectibles go, there's some interesting choices here. Notes can be found that mostly provide flavor text and world building. These are fine, but the most interesting thing you'll find are cages housing what the game refers to as friends. Each friend rescued increases your max HP by 5%, and most of these friends are characters from popular indie games of the era. And let me tell you, looking at it now, man, this is a pretty neat little time capsule. You got Meat Boy and Bandage Girl from Super Meat Boy, the kid from Bastion, Damsel and Guy Spelunky from Spelunky, Gomez from Fez, Tim from Braid. Gosh, this really takes me back. Who'd have thought I'd be nostalgic for games released in the late aughts and early 2010s? They even have the dishwasher and Yuki from The Dishwasher, a game developed by Ska Studios who would go on to make one of the best Metroidvanias of all time. Salt and Sanctuary. I said what I said. By far, the most common things you'll find while exploring are going to be treasure chests, and I'm not a fan of them. They require keys to open, and keys are largely discovered during exploration. So you have to find keys while exploring, and then use the keys on chests you find while exploring. Is that weird to anyone else, or is it just me? Like, why even put the keys in the game? I say eliminate the middleman, get rid of the keys, and just give us more chests to find instead. I don't feel like the keys add much to the experience as they're only used to unlock cages and chests. I was hardly ever excited to find keys. I want to find actual treasure, and it sucked finding a chest you couldn't open because you didn't have any keys, thus forcing you to come back later. Granted, this was more of an early game issue as I was swimming in keys by the late game, but still, it still sucked when it happened. It sucked almost as much as the stupid QTE minigames you had to play every time you unlocked a chest. Doing this every time you found a chest was obnoxious because 1, QTEs are lame, and 2, easy QTEs with 0 consequences are extra lame. I don't know, the rewards were usually decent but never essential. Money, food items, and blueprints mostly. But overall, it just felt like a time waster. And I don't even have a suggestion to make it better. Just remove the key mechanic, I say. The last thing of interest about Dust's exploration is how progress is gated. There's utility-gated progress for sure, but because abilities are given to you so far apart and sometimes incredibly late, Dust relies on color-coded locked doors and keys called resonance gems to bar your progress. These doors are found all throughout Falana, and resonance gems are given to you mostly by NPCs, either just by speaking to them or by accepting and completing side quests. Each time an NPC gave me a brand new resonance gem, I was never expecting it. I actually thought receiving resonance gems in this way was genius. It forced players to engage with the world, and quite frankly, I found it to be a little unexpected and refreshing. And that's everything for exploration. Dust's world isn't interconnected, and fast travel is only a one-way street out of biomes, making backtracking much more tedious than it needs to be. The maps are pretty helpful, labeling everything for you and tracking map and treasure completion. Even Fidget's helpful during exploration, hinting at chests in an area with her treasure hunting sixth sense.
Well, my kind has what you'd call a sixth sense. And there's something just ahead.
However, Ultimately, exploration isn't very thrilling or rewarding in Dust, mainly because the amount of collectibles are pretty sparse. And the game uses too many time-wasting mechanics, like blocking exits when enemies are near and the whole key and chest minigame mechanic. Exploration isn't terrible, but it's easy to see that most people enjoy Dust for its other, stronger attributes. Oh, and one last thing before we move on from this section. I wanted to give a quick shout out to the Sorrowing Meadow for being one of the worst experiences in the entire game. I always hate reaching this part. By all accounts, this section should be pretty cool, what with all the zombies and ghosts and spookiness.
Ah! What is that thing? It's hideous!
We've come this far together and you're surprised?
But it has evil knife hands! Evil knife hands!
But instead, it just drags on and on and on. The issue is, well, lots of things, but mostly the absence of fast travel. Sorrowing Meadow is huge and requires so much backtracking. There's a central area that branches in 4 different directions, and you have to go to the end of a branch, gather a MacGuffin, and then backtrack to the central area before heading down another branch. And you have to do this 4 times. It wouldn't be so bad if not for this one enemy who continually spawns zombies to not only clog up your path, but to also stop you from exiting areas because enemies are too close. And these enemies can only be hurt by Fidget's spells, so you'll be constantly running out of energy, leaving you with no means to damage this thing and no way to dodge until you wait long enough for your energy to refill. It feels like it was literally designed to waste your time and pad the game. It's a trial, let me tell you. And I know there are these little teleportation orbs near the mansions that you can jump into that'll take you close to the central area at the end of each of these branches, but I don't know, it's just not helpful enough, and this section just goes way too long.
Atmosphere, narrative.
It looks like we've finally gotten to Dust's next divisive aspect. Its atmosphere. Some people absolutely can't stand its character's looks, to which I'm specifically referring to the anthropomorphic character designs. I recently booted this game up to refresh myself before creating this video, and one of my friends saw that I was playing and immediately texted me with a message that said, "Turn that furry shit off, asshole." It's been over 10 years and I'm still getting bullied for liking this game. So yeah, you're either gonna be okay with the character designs or apparently be utterly repulsed by them. I'm sure there's someone out there with a reasonable take between these two reactions, but I haven't found one yet. I have found a few who really, really like the character designs, but we don't talk about them. Anyway, regardless of how you feel about the game's character designs, I personally find them to look generic outside of Fidget, but that might just be me. It's impossible not to see how gorgeous the game actually is in motion. I'm not going to harp on its brilliant use of colors and outstanding animations and beautiful environments because you've been looking at them the entire video. Unless you've just been listening, which is also cool. You do whatever you want to do with these vids. I'm not the boss of you. Dust's presentation is top tier, full stop. Excellent visuals, incredible animations, beautiful music, and fully voiced lines from every character delivered with varying degrees of competence. I, for one, thought the voice acting was pretty good all around. I've just heard others complain about it is all. I think Fidget's voice actor gives a standout performance. I can see how her high-pitched, cutesy voice might turn some people off, but I thought she sounded perfect for the role. Whiny, energetic, stubborn, goofy, frantic. She pulled off everything she needed to be a fun character. And her banter and chemistry with Dust was equal parts corny and endearing.
I don't think you're accurately capturing the pure size of Fidget's head.
My head is just fine. You're the ones wearing those stupid hats. Maybe you two could form a stupid hat club.
And I guess that brings us to the game's tone. It may not look it, what with its bright and vivid colors, but Dust is a pretty dark game, dealing with topics like racism, prejudice, war, and genocide. However, despite its serious subject matter, the game still manages to have a decent sense of humor.
Oh my, he really should have saved first.
Dust teeters between somber and whimsical with a success that could only be afforded through its fanciful environments and masterful animation style. Right when you think the game's tone will be consumed by the darkness of these characters' realities, Fidget pops in with a fourth wall breaking quip to provide some much needed levity. Never at inappropriate times, mind you. To the game's credit, it takes itself very seriously, which is impressive as so many indie games, especially in that era, tended to use self-deprecating humor, parody, or pretension as a crutch to hold up their narrative. It was refreshing to see a game like Dust trying to genuinely and succinctly express a message to players. Unfortunately, I emphasized the word trying for a reason. Dust's narrative isn't bad. It feels a bit rushed toward the end, does a lot of telling and not showing, and quite frankly, it squandered the one thing that would have taken its narrative to the next level that can only be achieved through the medium of video games. And that's that the game didn't leverage player agency. I'm going to delve deeper into all this in the spoiler section, so I'll try and give a quick, non-spoilery narrative summation. At its core, Dust is a tale about identity and character balance. The balance the game is focused on is innocence versus power, though I hate that they use the word innocence. I'd much prefer if they used empathy, but I'm going to go with the game's verbiage. So, innocence versus power. Anyway, what that boils down to is this. Innocence without power leads to impotence, and power without innocence leads to corruption. I like this message, and the game does a lot of good things to set this up for its audience, namely with the scenarios and antagonistic characters Dust faces. My main issue is that they don't do enough with Dust himself. There should be much more inner turmoil and conflict within Dust surrounding this balancing of innocence versus power. And that's really all I can say about the narrative without heading into spoiler territory. All in all, the narrative works well enough that it doesn't detract from the experience as a whole. Now, let's dive into this thing, shall we? Skip to this timestamp to fast travel to my final thoughts.
Spoilers.
Welcome to the spoiler section, where every obscure thing is brought up and the format don't matter. This spoiler section is going to be narrative focused, and I'm just going to start off by complaining. But let me preface things by saying I know this game was largely developed by one Pokemon. So I get that some things had to be cut or reduced for whatever reason to get this thing off the ground. Also, remember that I actually really like this game. These criticisms are coming from a place of love. Anyway, with that being said, I really wish this game would show more than tell when it comes to General Gaius and his army's oppression and cruelty. Anytime Gaius is on the screen, he's a compassionate worrywart desperately looking for his missing friend. I get that they wanted to humanize him as part of the game's balance motif, but they've ironically placed things off balance by only showing this guy as a level-headed and genuinely chill dude. This dude is supposed to be the Darth Vader of Falana. I need him to do evil Darth Vader shit. I need to see his army doing evil stormtrooper shit. We get told about all this bad stuff the army and General Gaius have done and are presumably still doing, but man, just let me see it. Without seeing the general being a bad guy doing bad guy things, the final confrontation just felt off. The dude even goes down with class.
Cherish it.
I genuinely felt bad when I beat him. Yes, I hear that he's an evil genocidal dictator, but that final fight would have been so much more impactful had I seen his evilness and cruelty with my own eyes. All I got to see was a sad dude wish his former best friend good fortune before falling to his death. It just didn't work the way they intended it to. That's really all I want to complain about. Now, I'd like to take a look at the game's big narrative misstep and offer up how I'd fix it. And this misstep is how the theme of balancing innocence and power was approached. The game does a good job of setting this theme up, especially with its boss characters, Fuse, Lady Tethys, and Baron Cain. Basically, when power outweighs innocence, or empathy as I'd rather it be called, it manifests as corruption or abuse of power. Each of these boss characters approach General Gaius' corruption and abuse of power with their own version of mishandled power. Fuse gains power through special armor and uses this power to indiscriminately murder anyone that's of the same race as General Gaius. Lady Tethys abuses her power by stopping the flow of water in an effort to choke General Gaius' resources. And Baron Cain uses his powers of wealth and influence to sell out his family and friends to General Gaius in exchange for more wealth and influence. Each of these characters wields their power without innocence or empathy, and in doing so, they bring about more pain and destruction. Fuse became a murderous racist and ultimately gets killed for his horrendous actions. Lady Tethys cutting off the water supply ended up accidentally hurting and killing her own people who also needed that water. And Baron Cain died bitter and alone because he sold out all his family and friends and now must roam the world as a tortured spirit. These are solid characters and scenarios that reinforce the game's theme, and I wouldn't change a thing. The misstep comes from how Dust is used to approach this theme of balancing power versus innocence. In short, he isn't used at all. And this is a huge problem because he's the personification of this game's theme. He's the Sin Mithrarin. He has the souls of Jin and Cassius within him, the souls of innocence and power, respectively. And the fact he never struggles to keep balance between these two forces within him is such a missed opportunity. There's seriously only one moment when Dust kinda gets overly upset.
She's a cheerful one, huh?
A bit of gratitude might have been nice. What kind of a bratty...
Hey, ease off, Dust.
But other than that, The game leans back on telling and not showing, having Dust telling Ginger about his internal struggle instead of letting us see it.
I won't lie. I felt him pulling me to take the quick and easy path, to leave the weak to fend for themselves, to show no mercy to those in my way.
I could delve deeper into all this, but there's a video you can watch right now from Games' Literature where he does a literary analysis of Dust and really gets into the weeds. He does a great job and you should check it out. Links in the description. But I do disagree with Games' Literature on one point, and that's his argument against player agency.
I've seen it argued that the better way to handle this would have been to allow the player more agency. Let the major crossroads in the story be up to the player to decide, and then give them the choice at the end of whether to fight with the Moonbloods or with Gaias. Essentially, whether to let Jin or Cassius take the lead. And while I can certainly see where that idea comes from, I don't think it would work very well in this game's favor. So I do think presenting this as a linear story was indeed the right decision.
To me, video games are an excellent vehicle for storytelling that can do what other modalities cannot. And that's provide player agency. And when player agency is leveraged effectively in storytelling, it can lead to some legendary moments.
So I do think presenting this as a linear story was indeed the right decision, but it doesn't really fix the problem we're talking about here. Dust never really struggles to maintain balance. He just seems to subconsciously relegate Jin to his personality and Cassius to his physical attributes, and rarely do the two ever cross.
Why not have three options? An imbalance of innocence Jin ending, an imbalance of power Cassius ending, and a balanced Dust ending. Make both imbalanced endings bad and the balanced ending good to reinforce the game's theme. And I say, don't make the three-option choice an overt choice. I think it'd be cool if the player is forced into an ending based on the actions and choices they made throughout their playthrough. So, how do we do this? You remember all these side quests you do throughout the game to help people? What if that was a facet to how balance was measured? Maybe you gain innocence points by completing certain side quests and power points by not helping those people or by doing certain other side quests. Or maybe you gain innocence points by not getting high enough combo or kill counts. And you gain power points by getting high combos and kill counts. Or let's take a look at the skill gems. Maybe you level yourself up in an imbalanced way, which then could be contributed to you being too innocent or too much into power, or you could be balanced for the Dust in it. There could even be certain decisions Dust could make along the way, or dialogue tree options that affect his innocence and power points. Take the side quest where the dude makes this kid go to a monster-infested area to do his laundry. Dust is given the option to rub poison ivy all over this jerk's clothes. This is a perfect moment to either build your innocence or power points. There are a ton of ways that could have been implemented to show the struggle between Jin and Cassius within Dust, both mechanically and narratively. It's just a little disappointing that Dodrill decided to use none of them.
Conclusion.
Dust and Elysian Tail is a Metroidvania that's as impressive as it is underwhelming. You can't look at this game and not be struck with awe when you hear one guy made all this. You can hate the character designs, but you gotta admit that the game's animations and beautiful environments hold up even to this day. But not everything holds up. The narrative's solid and has a great message, but it could use some fine-tuning. Add some struggles within Dust to make him a more complex and interesting character, and do a lot more showing than telling. The platforming could have been more interesting, and a little evolution to the game's combat as you progressed would have been much appreciated. Regardless of some shortcomings, there's a lot to like in Dust beyond its stellar presentation. Much love and care went into creating its beautiful world, and its characters are charming and endearing, especially Fidget.
Yes, hello. My name's Fidget. Maybe we've met?
But I'm a sucker for tiny flying companions, and she's one of the best.
What? Me?
Would I recommend Dust and Elysian Tail? Most MV vets have probably already played Dust, as it's been out for over a decade at this point, and I doubt they'll be revisiting it anytime soon unless they have nostalgia for it. There's just not a lot that Dust does that so many other Metroidvanias don't already do much better. As for MV noobs, if you like its art style and aren't turned off by Fidget's voice, I say give Dust a shot. It's about 10 hours long and is a wonderful representation of what indie Metroidvanias played like before Hollow Knight hit the scene. I'm going to close this out by saying I may have a lot of criticisms, but Dust and Elysian Tail is a very special game to me. And I know it's a special game to a lot of people. Not even 2 years ago, on Dust's 10th anniversary, Dean Dodrill went to Twitter or X or whatever and posted a comic thanking his fans. And at the end of this comic, was a positive message that one may construe as him returning to the land of Falana. I'm not saying that's what he's saying, but if that is what he's saying, just know I'll be the first in line for the next chapter of this Elysian Tail.